Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
T-minus 6 days. That's it, that's all. Less than a week to go before possible economic chaos rocks this country. In 6 days from now, Donald Trump will be sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. Based on everything that we know right now, one of his very first acts as president will be to impose a 25% tariff on all goods imported from Canada into the U.S. Canada's political leaders, both federal and provincial, have spent the last month or so responding to that threat. Prime Minister Trudeau, members of his cabinet, and provincial premiers alike have all been pleading Canada's case in their own ways, hoping to secure some kind of exemption to the across-the-board tariff. Or at least make Americans more aware that what Trump is about to do will be bad for them as well as us. Complicating things, of course, was Justin Trudeau's sudden announcement that he intends to resign as Prime Minister in the coming months. So with a lame duck Prime Minister, with federal Liberals embroiled in a leadership race, and with time ticking down to Inauguration Day, who is doing the best job responding to Trump? I'm David Smith, and this is The Big Story. And my guest today is Barry McLoughlin. Barry is an expert in corporate and political communications, branding, and leadership. He is the president of TLC, Transformational Leadership Consultants. Barry teaches at the Telfer School of Management at University of Ottawa and the MBA program at the Shannon School of Business at Cape Breton University. Hello, Barry. Thank you for taking the time.
David, it's always my pleasure to talk with you.
So we're grading today how Canada's political leaders are responding to the threat of tariffs from the incoming Trump administration. 1 week to go until Trump is sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. So let's start with the man in Canada who is, for now, at the top, and that is the outgoing Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. I say outgoing because he has, of course, announced he will be resigning at some point in the coming months once the Liberals have chosen a new leadership. So to date, Trudeau has taken the following action, Barry, on the Trump tariff threat. He went to Mar-a-Lago. He met with Trump in person in late November. His government then unveiled a border security package, $1.6 billion in new spending. He convened a special cabinet committee, which has reportedly come up with a list of possible counter tariffs. And late last week, and over the weekend, Trudeau did do 2 interviews with American television, one with CNN and the other with MSNBC. Here is some of Trudeau in that MSNBC interview with host Jen Psaki.
You may disagree with my suggestion that it's a fraught relationship, but I think some see it that way. But I think one of the reasons is because Donald Trump is, of course, going to be inaugurated in just over a week from now. He has been pushing this idea of making Canada the 51st state. I know that's not something you've taken too kindly to, but how seriously do you take that threat?
I mean, let's remember, I got to work with President Trump through his first 4 years in office, and we were able to renegotiate the most important trade deal either of us had, which is the Canada-U.S. Free trade deal, in a way that was beneficial to both our countries. And I know that as a successful negotiator, he likes to keep people a little off balance. The 51st state, that's not going to happen. It's just a non-starter. Canadians are incredibly proud of being Canadian, but people are now talking about that as opposed to talking about, for example, what the impact of 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum coming into the United States, on energy, whether it's oil and gas or electricity. I mean, no American wants to pay 25% more for electricity or oil and gas coming in from Canada. And that's something that I think people need to pay a little more attention to.
However, in the middle of all of that, there was a 3-week stretch where we heard very little, essentially nothing from the Prime Minister. After former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland resigned on December 16th, Trudeau did not speak publicly again until announcing his own resignation on January the 6th. So what do you think, Barry, about how Trudeau has responded to the Trump tariff threat and the threat of annexing Canada as the 51st U.S. state?
Well, of course, it couldn't have happened at a worse time for Justin Trudeau. I mean, the biggest existential threat to Canada's economy in his whole time as the prime minister, and at the time of his weakest political status, where he was twisting in the wind, we were all twisting with him. Is he going to stay? Is he not? All this taking place at a critical time when the shot was, fired across our bow, and here he was absent for quite a number of weeks. He looked shaken. He basically was attacked by his right-hand deputy and then finance minister who, literally threw a grenade at him on her way out the door. Just a shocking combination of factors here has meant that Canada's response to this, especially the federal government, has basically been hit, miss, all over the map, not pulled together really properly with the premiers. And it's every premier for himself, it looks like right now.
Yeah, disjointed is an interesting way to describe that. And how would you say, staying on the federal government side of things, how would you say the internal liberal leadership race might be pulling attention away from dealing with the threat of the incoming Trump administration?
Well, of course, it is a distraction to, complete focus. He's got to handle this well. And obviously, the liberal leadership race, well, I think he's trying to mostly stay out of it. I could be wrong, but he's said to us that he's not going to get involved with any one campaign or support any one candidate. So you have to take him at his word to a certain extent on that. I don't think that's the biggest thing. I just think that his own personal status is, I was saying that he's got to stay in the prime minister's chair for January 20th. Well, yes, he is, but he had to kind of pre-announce his resignation in order to do so. So Trump senses weakness. He sensed weakness with Trudeau. He doesn't like him. He resents him. I think half it maybe his looks. I don't know, but he doesn't like him. And he doesn't like the, quote, wokeness and all that stuff. So really, Trump is going to take whatever credit he can for the resignation of Justin Trudeau.
Moving on to Doug Ford. Doug Ford is the premier with arguably the most at stake ahead of Trump taking the Oval Office. The province of Ontario, just the province, is the United States' third largest trading partner. Ontario accounts for about 40% of Canada's national GDP. It has a lot of key industries that are deeply intertwined with northern U.S. states. Since about mid-December, Doug Ford has been doing many interviews with American media outlets, print as well as television. By my count, he has spoken with the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Associated Press, Bloomberg, CNN, NBC, CNBC, as well as Fox News. He's been all over the place, very visible, very outspoken. His government has also put money behind its campaign to counter Trump's tariff threats. Ontario is spending millions of dollars on an advertising campaign. It's already running. It will run until the inauguration on January the 20th. These are big money buys on American networks and local billboard space as well in Washington, D.C. So Ontario also released its border security plan and a plan to better integrate the Ontario energy grid with neighboring U.S. states, something that Ford calls Fortress Can-Am. Here's a little bit of Premier Doug Ford in a recent appearance on Fox News Channel with firebrand Fox News host Jesse Waters.
What's your problem with the United States absorbing Canada?
Well, first of all, Jesse, I love the U.S. I love Americans, and I get it. President-elect Trump is a real estate tycoon. He's made billions. But that property's not for sale. As simple as that. But I have a better idea, Jesse. Why don't we create Fortress AmCan and make sure it's the richest, wealthiest, most prosperous jurisdiction in 2 countries anywhere in the world? We have the critical minerals, we have the energy, we have the electricity that America needs. And there's only one place I'd want to sell it to, and that's the U.S.
Some commentators, Barry, have suggested that given the political chaos with the federal government in Ottawa right now, Doug Ford appears to be the captain of Team Canada on this file. What do you think?
Well, he'd love to take that mantle. Pretty well there was a vacuum, so Doug Ford filled it. There's no question about it. He was somewhat contradictory in his messaging. He began with threats of cutting our hydroelectricity to New York State, and then suddenly he's now going to double it. He had a few contradictions like that, but I think he's kind of settled now into the zone of it. And you can see with him, it's a combination of carrot and stick. He's trying to emphasize the carrot as much as humanly possible here. And he does it in his own inimitable, if I can pronounce that, way of, being schmoozy, the kind of guy you'd like to have a beer with, a down-to-earth guy, not one of those woke people lecturing you. Ford has that nailed. He's got years of experience, as did his late brother, Rob. So he's really good at that. And in a way, it's a shame that he hasn't met personally with Donald Trump, because I think actually they could hit off very well. So he's done a good job, really, of getting out there. And he's going to the media markets that the Trump people watch. I mean, we mentioned Justin Trudeau. He was on CNN to the left, MSNBC way left. Who's watching that? So it was kind of a strange selection of media outlets. And so I think that, Ford is prepared to take the game to Trump. And he's done, you got to give him full credit. He's done a good job.
Yeah, what do you make of the move from Trudeau to avoid those right-wing networks? Could the thinking there be putting him on Fox News with a very hostile interviewer might do more harm than any good?
Yeah, I think they're managing the downside risk of that. I mean, let's face it, Trudeau's pretty darn good at interviews. He knows how to give non-answers. Oh my gosh, he's got 9 years of experience at that, and the word salad answers and so on, that it's hard to decode what was the message out of that. But he actually is very good at it, and he looks great on television, of course, even when he's shaken and upset. But he has chosen this, and I think it's exactly that. I think he's trying to avoid saying a soundbite, that's going to hurt Canada, because he's really representing the country at this point, of course, and he is trying to play a safer game of trying to promote the positives. He's got the strategy of ignoring the 51st state kind of trolling that Trump's doing. He wisely did call it on the MSNBC interview. He did call it that, basically it's a distraction that a skilled negotiator uses. So he is not going to play that game by overly embracing it. He did say that tweet, there's not a snowball's hell and chance of us becoming the 51st state. That became the soundbite of everything. So he's careful. He's being very careful in his media selection, but I just think you got to take some risks. Hey, what's he going to lose? He's going to get out of office? I think we know that. So I think he should have taken more of a risk.
And back on Doug Ford, what do you make of the personality matchup between Ford and Trump? Better, I think, than Trudeau and Trump, where they do have some baggage and just incompatible personalities to begin with. What's the difference with Doug Ford there?
Yeah, and Ford, has worked for years and lived in the United States. The Ford family is very comfortable across border. I think that he would hit it off well, and Trump wouldn't see him as this good-looking younger guy that Melania is kind of batting eyelashes at. They got a video of that going on. No, it's a very different thing here. But he sees them as somebody he could do business with. And I think that the faster Ford makes that connection, the better.
Then we have Danielle Smith, perhaps most closely aligned with the Republican Party ideologically of any of the premiers. Danielle Smith has a lot at stake in this tariff fight as well. Canada exports some 4 million barrels of oil a day into the United States. 74% of the crude that comes out of the ground in Alberta goes to the U.S. That's a lot of oil. That's a lot of jobs in Alberta. That's a lot of pressure on Premier Smith. In response to the threats, Danielle Smith has done her own junket of interviews on American television. Not as many as Ford has done, but many, more than Trudeau. For example, here she is with Fox Business News.
A lot of people, speaking of tariffs, think that it was his reaction to those proposed tariffs that was in part of Justin Trudeau's downfall. What should be then the new leader's appropriate reaction to tariffs?
I would hope that we could avoid them altogether. It's looking less like that is likely, but I think we've got a very good story to tell about our integrated economies, about how we really are the best customer for the United States, that we buy $293 billion worth of goods from America. We also send a lot of commodities to the U.S. for upgrading, which allows for those products to not only create those value-added good American jobs, but also then make sure that they're re-exported back into Canada and elsewhere. So those are the kind of things that I think have make Canada a bit of a special case with the integrated economies that we have.
Smith may be favoring a more direct and in-person approach to this negotiation. She is the only premier so far to actually meet with Donald Trump in person. She did that this past weekend in Florida at Mar-a-Lago. Reportedly, the two had dinner and then had lunch together the next day as well. She will also be heading to Washington for an extended visit around Trump's inauguration. What do you think of what we have seen from Danielle Smith these last couple of weeks, Barry?
Well, you're right. Going to Mar-a-Lago was quite the move, and basically being able to have these kind of informal chats and photo ops with Donald Trump is really not hurtful to the cause. I mean, basically, she's able to break through. And of course, if you have a conversation with Danielle Smith, he would quickly realize, boy, we're aligned about economic issues. We're aligned about the role of government. We're aligned about. So I think that there's a lot of alignment going on there. My concern about her position, frankly, has been that she basically pulled the plug out from under Canada's position with regard to all things possible when it comes to countervailing taxes against the Americans. She said, "You better not be doing that to oil and gas. You better not. You better not. I won't stand for it." And so she did all this, which is really our primary export. She should have kept her powder dry, not have to do that. But she basically, I think hurt Canada's position in doing so. She didn't have to do that. So basically now we're in a situation where they're all trying to do this of schmoozing Trump, trying to massage his ego, Canada, aren't we all great? We do all things together. They pretty well have to do this because if we end up, saying if we end up attacking them, that's a loser's game. We are going to lose that game outright. So they're all, to a great extent, being restrained in what they're saying about the stupidity of Donald Trump's tariffs. They're not using that word, notice.
That is a very interesting observation. She has been a little more cordial, perhaps, in the tone. If there were maybe a reluctant member of Team Canada, such as it is these days, perhaps it might be Danielle Smith. Barry, her political brand has really been built on Western alienation in Alberta, and she uses phrases that we have become accustomed to hearing, for example, from Quebec political leaders, where she'll say stuff like, "I'm here to work for Canada and Alberta's interest," sort of a split loyalty there. Do you think that that's factoring into how she's responding to the Trump tariff threat?
Absolutely. She is not that worried, frankly, about Canada. It is Alberta. She feels that Alberta is over-contributing to our internal financing of provinces. She sees gazillions of dollars of Alberta money going to Quebec. She resents it highly. On and on and on. There's deep resentment. I do a lot of work in Alberta, and deep resentment about the federal government, period, not just this particular government, which has an irritation factor beyond what they've seen before. But I think in the end, she's still a Canadian, and she doesn't want these tariffs. She knows she's a very smart person. She knows these are damaging to our economy. She's aware of that. But her number one priority, she's made it clear, actually is Alberta. And because of the major exporter of oil and gas, which is huge to the economy on both sides of the border, she is basically saying, we don't want extra taxes on us, and you can do what you want about those other things, but not for Alberta. So she's drawn that line in the sand very clearly.
Okay, let's move along. I figure that's going to be very important in, I think, the next act of this play will be Pierre Poilievre. He's poised to become the prime minister if an election is held in Canada, unless things change in a in an astronomical sense. He's been trying to walk a political tightrope here. One thing he has been doing is linking Trudeau's weak leadership to the threat of tariffs from the incoming Trump administration. But in doing that, he's also trying to avoid giving the impression that he is happy to see Trump threatening Canada, even though it is politically advantageous to the Conservatives. You have to criticize Trudeau without sounding un-Canadian. Really, Poilievre hasn't said very much. They have not been flooding the airwaves with their own messaging on this, the Conservatives. He's answered questions when asked about it directly, sticking to his script. He has stated emphatically that no, Canada will never be a U.S. state. But other than that, we haven't heard all that much from Pierre Poilievre on specifics about how he would handle Trump's tariffs if he were to be the prime minister. How do you think Mr. Poilievre has done on this file?
Well, you are right to analyze it that way. He is being cool, low-key, restrained, whatever word you want to use in that. He knows that actually you could make a huge mistake on this file. You could just say the wrong thing. Canadians loathe and fear Donald J. Trump. And if he even gets a soundbite implying that, hey, Trump's got a good point here, look out. He actually knows that, so he is being very low key, doing the minimum as you imply, to stand up for Canada. But obviously that will change once we move into an election, outcome that may well be, his victory, and then suddenly he's got to actually be Captain Canada. So it's kind of implied that, a stronger economy, stop doing all this kind of distracting woke stuff, all the things that Donald Trump finds irritating without sounding like he's doing it because of Donald Trump's loathing of Justin Trudeau. He does blame Trudeau for everything. And there's lots to go around, of course, but basically he's trying to keep the focus on him because you know what? He's learned, don't, if your client or your opponent in this case has, started a fire, don't jump into it. Let that happen. And he's really letting Justin Trudeau, really suffer from those flames. And he is not going to be the person that becomes the big voice, because what's his alternative to this? We haven't quite heard it, but he knows that if I step out with my own all kinds of ideas, then he's going to be in trouble. So he has to watch that.
In closing today, I'd like to close with some thoughts from you, Barry, on the man at the center of all of this, and that is Donald Trump, about to become the 47th president of the United States. There's two parts, really, to this whole Trump conversation we've been having over the last month and in the past week. Factor number one, tariffs, 25% tariff threat. That's a economic grenade he's throwing into a very lucrative and until recently stable bilateral trading agreement between Canada and the U.S. But then there's also all of this talk, and it's ramped up incredibly fast in terms of his rhetoric about making Canada the 51st state. It was seen as trolling, as joking, as ribbing, whatever you want to call it, until suddenly it became quite serious, and he was on national television taking questions from reporters about it. And in light of that, all of our leaders here in Canada had to respond. That really became the news cycle for the past number of days. So what's his game here? What do you make about this? On the tariffs, on the trolling about the 51st state, why is Trump going about it this way?
That's a big question. It's probably half psychological and half political. But I'll say this: I've studied him for 30 years, quite literally. I know people that know him really well, and what you see is largely what you get. A very close friend of his tells me, when you go to dinner with this guy, he won't shut up. He will not stop talking. His wife says nothing. He says everything. He takes all the oxygen in the room. This is his good friend telling me this. So, I'm just saying, this is what you're dealing with here. He is a disruptor. He intends to disrupt the world economy. He intends to, in effect, be the bully boy that America has always been very careful of not being for decades, trying not to come across this way. He's going after his friends before his enemies. He's going after the EU with Denmark. He's going after Panama. He's going after Canada. And the fact that you've done all these wonderful things with us and blah, 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 that washes right over him. He loves tariffs. He believes in tariffs. He believes there's no consequences to tariffs. He said to us on day one of my administration, I will in effect be a dictator. I will set aside the Constitution for the first day. Nobody's quoted that in recent months. Notice that? He said that several times in the campaign. So this could be his one day. And he's a risk taker. He is going to disrupt everything. He's putting in place cabinet ministers that have no business being, cabinet secretaries that have no business being there, and kind of laughs at it and rolls on. He really, we've never seen a political character like this, and I don't know when. And Canada is always trying to, do by the normal rules of conduct and comportment and respect. Well, that went out the window, and don't expect it to come back anytime soon. So we don't know really how to play this game. We're trying our best. The one thing we are doing right is not overly reacting to 51st state trolling. That's all it is. It's trolling. But it is a distraction, and Trudeau got that one right. Trudeau did get that right. You got to focus on the tariffs and stay out of that whole thing that he'd love you to engage him on. And so we've gone as far as we intend to go on that as a country. We should not be going any further on that. So really, this is an era, this is a year, maybe 4 years of complete disruption on all fronts. And we kind of have to batten down the hatches, keep our economy as strong as we can as we try to get through these very rough waters.
Barry McLoughlin, thank you so much for your time today. It's always a pleasure to get into the weeds on some of this stuff and pick your brain about how all of this works. Really great conversation today. Thank you again.
Thank you, David. My pleasure.
And again, that was Barry McLoughlin, president of TLC Transformational Leadership Consultants, expert in issues management, crisis communications, political leadership, and branding. We thank him for his time today. That was The Big Story. You can send us feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can find us on the Seeker app or any other of your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. Until next time, I'm David Smith. Thank you for listening.